Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Anita Black, and I am your professor for our Justice Administration course, Justice 605. And so I want to start with Module 1, and this covers chapters 1, 2, and 3. Administration is learned through on-the-job training. So most administrators are not born with the leadership skills, but they learn them through experiences in the field and with training and, just working with their peers. Administration is a science that can be taught, but it's not a talent that one must be born with. Criminal justice professions and professionals have always referred to themselves as part of the criminal justice system. As Chapter 1 shows us in our textbook, the authors emphasize the characterization of the various justice professions as being a part of a system. So it implies that a common set of goals exists to which all justice professions should be working to achieve. So for the criminal justice system to operate efficiently, all of its components, professions, must be conducting their activities with the achievement of that set of goals as their priority. Before this has any chance of occurring, all the agencies must have a common understanding of what are the goals of the system. So for an administrator in the criminal justice organization, it is essential that he or she is aware of the goals of the justice system. So what are the goals of the criminal justice system? Is it to punish offenders, prevent crime? Do we want to compensate the victims for their losses? We want to make citizens feel safe? Or do we want to restore harmony in the community? On pages 3 and 4 of your text, the authors make an offhand mention of several issues which are typically addressed in the more academic writings about management and administration. Your authors, of course, are bragging that their text is more nuts and bolts and more oriented toward the practical application of the concepts and ideas that are covered. In fact, your authors, they do just that, and that is precisely why their text was really chosen for this class. However, notwithstanding their insinuation towards more academic approaches, some of the topics are worthwhile for us to look at more closely, and that's what we're doing within this presentation. The distinction between power and authority, this is one of those issues that I was talking about. What person in a management or administrative position does not wield that power? Or is it authority which is wielded? Or both? And lastly, does it make a difference as long as the job's getting done? So let's take a closer look at that. At one end of this process are the police, and we view their primary role as getting lawbreakers off the streets. At the other end are the correction officials, and we look at them as being primarily custodial in nature. Now, somewhere in between are the courts that try to ensure a fair application of the law to each case. In his book, The Police and the Community, David Carter, he provides a provocative look at authority in a police setting. So here's a detailed excerpt from Dr. Carter's book that I think you will enjoy. And I will read it, but also it is included within my notes in the module. The noteworthy English social anthropologist Michael Blanton refers to the difference between a police force and a police service. Blanton, makes much of the point that police officers function more effectively professionally when what they do and how they do are supported by a moral consensus of the community. Officers possess both authority and power. Authority is a rightful power. It has a moral quality. Now, officers possess both authority and power. Authority is a rightful power. It has a moral quality. And Banton argues that public resentment against police is usually directed toward their exercise of power under circumstances in which the community support is questionable, ambiguous, or clearly divided. When officers function on the basis of assured community support or their authority, their behavior is more predictable. Police officers whose conduct is uncertain, Banton suggests, rely on their power, unconcerned with whether their clients feel they are exercising it rightfully. What they do then is unpredictable. Carter, then he turns our attention to the work of the great German sociologist Max Weber. You may recall Weber pioneered much of what has become the study of bureaucracies and the management to client relationships found in bureaucracies. Weber was concerned with the issue of authority and power and how each of these relate to compliance of some persons to the directives of others. Have faith, guys. I do have a purpose here. Carter writes, Max Weber saw authority as one form of compliance. Weber dealt with three variations. Mach, which might, means that A enforces his wish on B despite resistance. Herrschaft, which is power, means that the commands of A will be obeyed by B and others. And legitimy, Herrschafts, authority, is a claim to obedience grounded in a belief that the claim is legitimate. Now, finally, some of you are saying, get to the point, Dr. Black. The discussion by Carter was designed to examine the relationship between police power and police authority and citizens. The same ideas are also helpful for us to see the relationship between managers and those managed. Even if criminal justice organizations come to a consensus upon what goals constitute the goals of the system, the goals of each organization, as perceived by each respective organization, may not be consistent with the goals of the system. Because the success of the system requires the cooperation of each justice organization, it is imperative that the individual organizations subordinate their individual goals to the system's goals or redefine their organizational goals to be consistent with the goals of the system. Administrators are often loath to take such steps, and they appear to adopt a conflict theory position, as suggested by the authors in our Chapter 1. The adoption of a conflict theory position by criminal justice organization diminishes the potential for the criminal justice system to succeed in obtaining its goals. So, as a matter of fact, many criminal justice authorities assert that the system has failed to prevent and reduce the amount of crime in the U.S. today. Unless criminal justice organizations begin to operate under a consensus theory rather than under the conflict theory, it's unlikely that the system will be successful in achieving its goals. Now, even if administrators adopt a consensus theory position, the success of the system is unlikely unless the administrators can effectively communicate that attitude to their employees and motivate them to work towards the success of the system rather than to focus on the best interests of the organization. And that's important. As indicated by our authors, communication is one of the most important dynamics of an organization, and the ability of an administrator to communicate goals in a convincing manner is as important function of the criminal justice administrators. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Now here's a clear definition of both of those models that y'all can read through. Let me go back one. There is a figure within your textbook, 1.2, that discusses both the due process model and the crime control model. I'm not sure the page number because it's going to depend on your edition. But in criminal justice, we have got to provide due process, fairness, and focus on the defendant's rights that are provided in the Bill of Rights. So police powers should be limited. Constitutional rights aren't technicalities, and the CJ process should resemble an obstacle course. The crime control model explains that the repression of crime is of utmost importance to provide order. So our system focus should be on helping victims rather than the defendant's rights, and we see a lot of this within restorative justice. Police powers should be expanded, legal technicalities eliminated for the ease of arrest, search, and seizure and conviction. The process should operate like an assembly line, and there should generally be a presumption of guilt of the accused and the police prosecutors' views that are trusted. Obviously, criminal justice organizations with employees responding well to intrinsic rewards will be more efficient than those who do not have such employees. In other words, criminal justice hiring practices should screen for applicants who seek employment because they hope to be able to make a positive contribution to society. Law and litigation affecting criminal justice employees can arise out of federal and state constitutions, statutes, administrative regulations, and judicial interpretations and rulings. Even poorly written employee handbooks or long-standing agency customs or practices may create these vested rights. And as I mentioned earlier about communication, related to job satisfaction and an organization facilitation of upward communication. And the authors indicate most employees rate their organizations as poor at enabling upward communication. Consequently, then, criminal justice organizations need to pay particular attention to eliminating obstacles to upward communication and create avenues for the upward communication. Well, I didn't promise that this would be a great selection. We'll get better as we get farther into the textbook and talk more about the different agencies. But nevertheless, our purpose here was to form a relation between the concepts of authority and power within a police context to a context of a manager in an organization. I think that there are some interesting parallels which focus our attention on a critical point. And this is probably a point most of you no doubt recognize, but we do need to note it with consideration. The point, compliance is at the heart of management. Moral authority is at the heart of compliance. So what we have added to that point is an enrichment of how we can look at compliance through the ideas of known thinkers such as Max Weber. And at this point, at the end of our first module, we should have a clear understanding of what we mean when we say the manager's authority is deteriorating. Now, this section here in this lecture doesn't cover everything in the chapters because you're going to read that. I just want to cover what I see as the most important points that I hope you take away from this module.